Okay. So I'm gonna start, and as the kids trickle in, they will trickle in. All right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. I want to welcome everyone here. This is like, I think, our third department talk where we are inviting people to come and talk to the history department, the humanities department about a fun project we're doing. In 2000, it was 4 years ago, I sent Ruth an email because I had seen that she was running this art project called Chalk. This and she replied, and since then she's been working with the school. So this year will be the fourth year that we will be participating in this art installation of sorts that commemorates the events of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which happened on March 25th, 1911. And 1911, right? Yeah. Yes. And Ruth came to the school a couple of years ago where she spoke to the students, and I decided this year why not do it virtual. So she'll be sharing with us this project. And when I started teaching 14 years ago, many years ago, I always did a unit of study on, like, the progressive era, industrialization. And a lesson I always did was always on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And so this sort of continues, and our teachers always cover this topic. And having Ruth's Project here actually gives it a new sense of meaning, because it was a tragic event that really did shape the future of our city. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Ruth Sergel, our dear friend.
Hey everybody, hello from Berlin, Germany. Glad to be able to visit with you today. Thank you for the invitation. Your school just totally rocks. I'm so excited about all the work you folks do. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, both what it was, what happened then 100 years ago, and also the socially engaged artwork I created in response. And then I'd love to just talk to you folks a little bit about how we can respond to things, especially injustices that we don't fully have control over. So I think it would help maybe, I have a little video, and Ms. Cahill, could you play it for me? It's just like 3 minutes long.
Sure.
To kind of give the history.
Okay, I'm trying to open it.
No pressure or anything.
I just do have a, sorry, I'm trying to get it up. Okay. I believe this is the one you sent, right?
Yeah. Great. If you can just make it full screen.
Yep.
And so just. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. So yeah, in 1911, there was a factory just 1 block east of Washington Square Park with hundreds of workers in it. And they cut a lot of corners. They were supposed to have 3 staircases to get people out. but instead they got away with 2 staircases and a fire escape that only led to an inside courtyard. And when the fire broke out, when they ran on this fire escape, it broke off the building and dropped people to their death. One door was locked by the owners who were greedy and afraid of theft, and also to keep union organizers out. Another door had a barrel of machine oil right next to it, which eventually exploded, so nobody could get out that door. And there was an elevator that an elevator man had to operate, that he did as bravely as he could for as long as he could, until it got so hot that the metal bars of the elevator shaft bent and he couldn't go up anymore. And so pretty soon, the workers, who were mostly caught on the 9th floor, started jumping out the windows. And in less than half an hour, 146 workers were killed. There was a trial, and at the trial, the workers who testified, who were often immigrants who didn't speak English as their first language, were ashamed and humiliated for their lack of English skills, as if that meant they weren't telling the truth about what they experienced. And the owners got off, they collected insurance money, and they went on to open more factories, lock more doors, and sew fake union labels into their clothing. So, but the good thing that came out of this was that for many people, this fire was a wake-up call. And instead of just this sort of same old thoughts and prayers, people actually took action. So a lot of our fire and safety laws that we have to this day come from this fire. And in particular, because Frances Perkins, the first woman in the cabinet, witnessed the fire. And so she says that the New Deal was born out of the flames of this fire. So I think for me, growing up as a New Yorker, there's something about when you hear these stories that are so without justice in them that is infuriating, and it's like a black seed or stone in your heart, because there was no justice in the situation. And we see that today, of course, again and again. We see that with Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, or with the violence against women. There's just so much violence in the world and pressure put on people, and it's really hard to find ways to get justice within the system. So sometimes I think that art makes it possible for us to find ways to address those things. So for example, in this case, the owners were really counting on the fact that they had tons of people who would take those jobs, even if they were terrible work conditions. And they thought nobody would notice if 146 people got killed. And part of the reason I do my project every year since 2004, of going to the workers' homes to write the names, is one, I want to make their lives visible, that you cannot erase people and get away with it. We will come back every single year to make sure the world remembers who they were. And two, that I wanted to center the project at the people's home, not at where they died, because they're more than their death. They were young people, most of them were in their teens or early 20s, and they all had hopes and dreams for their lives. And I want to honor who they were, not just the bad luck they had to be working at this factory on that March day. So I think that's my inspiration for it, and also for sharing the story down through the generations to people like you, because we want the next generations to know the story, not just to know our history, but so that we recognize when these injustices are happening again today, and we find ways to use the strength of what happened before to propel us to fight back today. So I think that's maybe enough for my introduction. Would people like to ask questions or talk about it a little? Or do people have specific questions that I could address? It's hard, I can't see you. So.
I'm sorry, I cut out. What you? I didn't, do you want me to put another video on or?
No, no, I was just asking if people have questions.
Sorry, it cut out a second on my end.
No worries.
If we were in a classroom, everyone would have been chatty and trying to get a question in, but everyone gets so shy online. Does anyone have any questions? Sheena, do you have a question?
Oh, great question. I think for me, I knew about the story since I was a little girl. And being an artist, I really wanted to make a project about it. But to be honest, for many years, I had only incredibly stupid, bad ideas of how to make a project about it. They were very sort of sentimental and I don't know, they were just kind of stupid, honestly. And I'm really glad I didn't make any of them. So it just took me some time to reach this point, and part of it for me was experiencing September 11th, 2001 as a New Yorker. And that day for me, I ended up creating a project for that where I created a booth, like where you get your passport taken, well, not anymore, but you get your picture taken in a little booth. And you could go and record to video your experience of September 11th. And we recorded 550 videos in New York, Pennsylvania, where the plane went down, Washington, D.C., and inside the Pentagon. And from that experience, I was thinking a lot about how we remember our history, both our personal history and our collective history. And in that case, for September 11th, there was so much pressure, like from mainstream media and the government, to think about that event like in one very narrow way. And I wanted to think about it as a human being, as a New Yorker, you know, that saw people hurting. And I think we all have different experiences in our lives that change us, like fundamentally change who we are and how we see the world and how we see justice and accountability or the lack of it. And I think sometimes we think we're the only ones thinking about that or in the way we're thinking about it. But if you can translate it into a creative project and share it with the world, then you create the opportunity for naming something. And then other people can see something that maybe they were actually also thinking about, and they can join you, and we can find a lot of strength that way together. I don't know if that answers your question. Let me know if I missed it. Yeah, I think that one thing art can do for us, and I think especially now where there's a lot of pressure with social media and stuff to present yourself in a certain way, but in reality, inside, we're all a little messed up, you know, like sometimes we know who we are and what we think, and sometimes we don't know, or sometimes we want things that are actually contradictory, or you know, there's a lot of more depth to each of us as a human being. And I think art creates a place where we can sometimes let go of our fantasies of who we think we are and be a little bit more truthful with who we actually are. And that allows a lot of different kinds of conversations to happen. So you can kind of find connections with people that you might not find through other means by experiencing art together. Yeah, please give it to me. Well, I think one thing about the Triangle Fire story is that there's many different avenues into it. You can feel connected to it because your background is Jewish or Italian American. You can be connected to it through the labor movement and garment workers. You can be connected to it as a woman because most of the people who perished were women and girls, or through the neighborhood. You know, there's a lot of different ways into it. So that means that there's a lot of different ways to tell the story. And I think that the meaning of the Triangle Fire changes over time. So when I first started it, it was, like I said, right after September 11th. So people were thinking a lot about people coming out of buildings and going to their death. Then there was the economic crisis of 2007-8, and then all of a sudden people were talking about workers and capitalism. Then more recently, there's been the way that we think about immigrants, and people have a very romantic vision of immigrants from 100 years ago, that, you know, they came here and they created new lives, and, you know, we have a very positive image of that. But then when you get them talking about immigrants today, they often will have a very negative image, even though it's the same struggles, essentially. So I think that if you can look at the struggles of immigrants, for example, through the lens of the immigrants of 100 years ago, it can help shift how people perceive. And that can be helpful to us because we're all in this together. And there's a lot that's trying to separate us right now. But there's a lot of extraordinary possibility for how we are constantly recreating our communities and our country. And I hope this can be a model for that. Okay, thanks, Gina. And if you need any more for your article, you can just email me, okay?
Thank you, Sheena. Okay, anyone else have any other questions? Somebody else has to have one question. Okay, if not, then I'll just ask the question, all right? So, Ruth, you mentioned this in your last question about how this event has sort of, the world around us sort of impacts how you look at this specific event, right? For me personally, you know, when I was in high school, I first learned about it. It was because, you know, there were immigrants, right? I'm the child of I'm a first generation American, child of immigrants who worked very hard. And that story resonates with all immigrant groups that come into this country working really hard in conditions that aren't always the best conditions, right? But now, you know, with the pandemic, right? It's sort of like with the whole activism piece, right? So how can we call out, right, that there's not the proper medical care for all people, right? So how do you think, if we had to memorial, you know, if we had to do an equivalent of talk, let's say, for the pandemic, as an artist, how do you tackle something when it's so current?
That's a great question, and it's, I'm going to come back to it, but I will just say that I think, you know, you bring up a really good point in terms of, you know, how do we treat essential workers today? And I think everybody's all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, I really do need people to be bringing foods to the grocery store, and people in the grocery stores to be at the cash out cashier for me to get my food. And all of a sudden, and yet, what do we pay those people, and what do we give them in terms of basic health care so that they can be safe, or if they get sick, they can get the care that they need without being, you know, left with huge debt. So I think that one of the things this pandemic can do, hopefully, is raise broader awareness of, you know, some people have a fantasy that stuff just appears in front of them, but it doesn't. The food has to be picked, it has to be trucked, it has to be put on the shelves, and we have to be able to buy it from people. And every person in that link should be earning a living wage and should be working in safe working conditions. And if they're not, that's a failure on all of us as a society. And we have to pay attention to that, because we should not have billionaires right now who are making many more billions during the pandemic when people can't have basic safety or can't get proper equipment. But to answer, come back to this, actually, if I could ask, maybe I can open another link. One thing I'm doing for the pandemic is, sorry, let me see if I can multitask here. One thing I'm doing for the pandemic is I started making a thing called pandemic postcards, because I got, I felt like I was reading the news and I just felt like they weren't ever talking about what I was actually experiencing during the pandemic, and what I was feeling, and my fears for people and my hopes for people. And so I started, sorry, I'm just going to send this. Sorry, I'm totally new to Google. Okay, give me 1 second. So I started to make what I call pandemic postcards. And the idea of that was that I started taking newspapers and cutting them up and then making little postcards. This is also when we wanted to save the post office. So you can buy blank postcards at the post office that already are stamped. And I would just buy the newspaper and cut it up and cut out pictures I liked, and words that said what I wanted to say. And Ms. Cahill, I just emailed you another link.
Yes, I'm opening it right now.
Thank you. Teamwork.
So while, Ruth, before you continue, students, I just want you guys to think about, like, how do we make connections so that we could play a role, right? Like, you guys are all extremely talented young individuals who are doing work that is phenomenal, right? Like the stuff you guys do on AutoCAD, the stuff you guys do on Photoshop, the stuff you guys do, like there's adults that aren't able to do that, right? So you guys have this superpower, this talent of getting into this technology, right? So I want you guys to think about how do you, that's why we bring in people like Ruth, right? The architects to talk to you guys. Where can you play a role to be inspired, right? Like how can you, student X, right? Loving issue, whatever, how can you then push that issue? That's what I want you guys to think about, all right? So I will stop talking. I'm sorry, Ruth, sorry to cut you off.
No, that was great. And actually, I would like to back you up and just real talk for a moment. I mean, sometimes you know that you're living in a moment that's historic, right? Like I experienced that on September 11th, 2001. You folks, through nothing you've done or not done yourself, you are going to be the pandemic generation, and you're going to be marked by this. And the thing about that is there's going to be a lot of people telling the story of what this time meant, right? There's going to be news broadcasts and movies and songs and all kinds of stuff people are making to say what this experience was. And I want to be really precise with you. It is extremely important that you keep a personal record of what your experience of this is every single day. And not like a big thing, like you can just like write stream of consciousness, 1 minute, first thing when you wake up every morning, or use your phone when you wake up in the morning, take a picture of the first thing you see every day. You know, whatever you want, just one thing every day, because time will go on and it will pass and you'll forget things about what this actual experience was for you. And other people will try to tell you what this experience was, and it will start to slant away from what you actually experienced. And it's extremely important that you keep a record so you can always come back to what you experienced. The good, the bad, it doesn't matter. It's just whatever is truthful to you. It's really important for your generation to keep a record so nobody can ever lie to you about what this time is. Does anybody want to talk about that? About what this is like right now? Or if you've made anything in response to living in the pandemic?
Everyone's very quiet. Come on, guys. Somebody talk.
I'm sorry, it's hard because I can't see you guys to call on people or anything. Well, maybe I can pose it as a question more. Like, I'd be really curious to know your experience right now. Like, if you found that people were more kind than you expected, more generous during this time, or if it was just the opposite, if you found people were a little bit harsher during this time and kind of tuned out from each other. Can anybody tell me like what your experience has been like with other people in this time? Are they like randomly calling people? Can you tell me more, Kendall? Like in what way? Do you think people are more compassionate? Yeah. So you feel like they're being more human now, kind of, in a sense. More humane, maybe. Are you guys discovering stuff about yourself in this time? Like, I'm curious if you're finding things in yourself that are surprising to you, like what you thought you were like more extroverted or introverted, or needing time by yourself, or needing to be more social in a different way. Are you finding things in that that's different than what you thought you were? Yeah. In what way did you get more in tune with yourself? Like, what does that mean? Do you feel like you just more aware of who you really are, or yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people discovered that they needed to be social much more than they realized. Like, not just with friends, but even just interactions like on the subway or whatever. Yeah. Do you feel like because of this that you're connecting with your friends more deeply than you did in the past? Like, are the relationships more kind of honest or no? No. Do you feel like you're looking out more for each other during this time? Mm.
You know what I found interesting, like while this is going on, is that there is more pensive of your thoughts. There is a whole, and I think this is going to be a long term thing that we're going to have to go back to, where we are more comfortable, like, responding now through messages, like on your phone, right? You send a text message rather than like the old days where you picked up the phone and talk to someone, right? Even though like all of us as individuals want to be more connected, right? The pandemic blocked us from being with the people we loved and cared about, but to be connected with them, we had to do it through like a more distant means of communication, right? So as we come out of this, hopefully sooner rather than later, that's why, like, you know, we're all in the school building who's home, the teachers are here, the kids are home, right? When we come out of this, I hope that we will go back to like wanting to talk, right? Like to unmuting yourself and saying something, right? Well, that's just the thing that I've been thinking about. Like, we want to be with people, and yet we still send a text, right? Instead of just picking up the phone and making the call. So, you know, this did change the way we, as humans, interact with one another. But thank you guys for putting in those comments.
Mhm. Now, I'm wondering, you know, Kevin, when you say about being pensive, are people finding that they're like, you know, you're not seeing each other so much socially to just give out thoughts and share thoughts with people and stuff. How are you guys getting your feelings out? Like, how are you? That sounds kind of low, but seriously though, like, what are you doing? Like, are you? It's a super intense experience to go through this pandemic, like, no doubt. And it's not how we're supposed to be interacting with each other, or lack of interacting with each other, and especially at your folks' age. And I'm wondering, like, what do you deal with like intensity of emotion and stuff? Are you making things? Are you doing things? Like, what do you do when you have a lot in you that needs to get out? Mm-hmm. And Oscar, what do you mean, like, how do you think things are going to be different, even once we get through the pandemic? How do you think it's going to change things? Mm. The other thing I'd like to acknowledge too is there's going to be a lot of grief for a long time, right? Because we lost a lot of people, and whether we personally lost somebody close to us, or people we know lost people who they loved, and that kind of grief takes as long as it takes to get through. And it's very early days for dealing with grief right now. Like, if you lose somebody, it's not something that you get over, and certainly not fast. And it's still like the beginning of a grief process that might take quite some time. We need to be deeply kind to each other and hold each other through that process.
I have a question about the fire. If we could talk more in depth about who the women were, their backgrounds, where they came from. I think we touched upon that a little earlier, but I think it's really interesting to know, you know, where these women came from and a little bit more about who they were. Yeah. Thank you.
So most of the workers at the Triangle Factory were immigrants. And, you know, we have to remember when they left their countries then, one, they didn't know what they were getting into, really, besides maybe some letters they had received or whatever. And two, when they left home, they were never ever going to go back. That was it. They were absolutely cutting themselves off from their communities. Most of the workers were either Jewish from now like Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, that kind of part of the world, or Italian, most from Sicily. And they were young. The youngest worker who was killed was 14, and most of them were in their teens and 20s, and there was a few older, but most of them. And this was also something where for women, as hard as the job was, and it was a really hard job, it was also independence and making their own money, which is something some of them have not really been able to do in the old country. So this represented a huge opportunity for them. And there's a lot of things like where they would change their name when they came to try to Americanize. And there was a lot of culture happening in Lower Manhattan at that time. There was theater and music and educational opportunities and politics. So there was a lot of stuff that people could get involved with at that time very easily. And so even though they were working incredibly long hours, it was still, compared to what they left behind, a completely new world for most of them. Is that what you were asking? Or is there something?
Yes, thank you. That was great. And yeah, just learning about, the history of them in New York City and what was happening at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one thing also that's really tragic about the fire is a lot of the people who worked there were family members, sisters or brothers or mothers and children or cousins or neighbors or friends. So like there's 3 workers who all lived on Cherry Street in Lower Manhattan, and 2 of them were cousins, but all 3 of them were close friends, and they would walk to work together. And there's a lot of interrelation, and I think a lot of that when the fire happened, there's some conversation about like who got out and who didn't. Sometimes an older sibling is looking for their kid sibling and they wouldn't leave without them, and then they died in the fire, but actually the younger sibling had gotten out, and things like that. And so I think even the people who survived, there was a lot of guilt for having survived, even though of course it's wonderful that they got out. But many people who survived left very close friends or family members who didn't make it. The worst cases, there was the Maltese family, a mother and her 2 daughters, one who was 20 and one who was 14, all died in the fire. And so in that family, all the women just got wiped out in that one event.
So, Ruth, we're going to wrap up because the kids have to go off to another class. So I wanted, all right. I don't know if you heard it, there's traffic outside, but I wanted to thank you. And also, students, you guys will be covering the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire next week on the 25th. We are going to be doing, lessons that go with this event. So this is sort of your introduction. And, Ruth will also, she sent us some names that we will be commemorating this year. I was looking back at the last couple of years, even last year when the pandemic started, we had some students who made some plaques on the wood cutting machine, and we made the posters. Some of you guys earlier this year, like last 2 weeks, did some of, took pictures with the names of the people, of the victims. So we will continue to commemorate this event. And Ruth, thank you. And the postcards are super interesting. And I think it's going to be something I'm going to talk to the teachers about, how we could incorporate it, as a project for the spring, sort of to bring some happiness as we're coming out of this. So as always, Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to the day when you'll be with us in the school building again and chatting with the kids.